Well, welcome, JZU members and guests to our second week of the 4-week nonviolence series. Tonight, entitled Relating Across the Divide, Getting to the Heart of the Matter by Kim Redigan. A few logistics before we begin though. All but the host and speaker will be muted to give optimum environment to hear the speaker. And if you're new on Zoom, the microphone button and the video button are on the left-hand bottom of your screen. And if you're having any trouble with the audio, even with the mic on, just check the volume on your computer. As has been mentioned already, each program will be recorded, and the link will be shared with all of the participants after the series is completed. And if you do not want to be recorded, just turn off your video camera now. You can make comments as the program progresses by opening the chat option by clicking on the chat button in the middle at the bottom of your screen. However, since this is going to be an interactive presentation, I think Kim would prefer that you hold your comments, especially your questions, to the end of after the presentation is completed, because chatting, trying to chat while we're trying to be interactive could be a huge distraction. And to ask a question of Kim, all you have to do is open the chat and click on the drop-down box labeled Everyone. And then in the drop-down box, you will find Marge Sears's name. Find her name, click on it, and then type your question. Marge will then screen and record the questions as they come in, and will read as many as possible to Kim during the question and answer time. Now, the JZU Peace and Justice Committee and the beloved community at JZU sponsor this series, which is continued from last winter when it had to be halted by the pandemic. The principles and practice of nonviolence are needed even more today, as we well know, and we are so grateful to our presenters and to you participants for taking this time to be here. We hope you will take away practical ideas and actions that you can use in everyday living. We also hope you will attend the 2 next programs on the next 2 Wednesdays at 7 p.m. And at the end of the series, we'll send out an action guide with useful websites and organizations to further inform and challenge you to practice nonviolence. And now to our speaker, to our presenter, to our facilitator, Kim Redigan. Kim is a theology teacher, a writer, and violence de-escalation trainer with the Meta Peace Team. She has served on several domestic and international peace teams with MPT, including Palestine and most recently at the US-Mexico border. She represents Michigan Coalition for Human Rights on the Detroit People's Water Board and is on the Direct Action Committee of the Michigan Poor People's Campaign. Kim is interested in exploring what it means to be a prophetic healer in a world addicted to fear and violence. Another thing that you will definitely want to note is that Kim is a very accomplished and inspirational writer. You can check out her blog at righttimeforpeace.com. That's right spelled W-R-I-T-E, righttimeforpeace.com. Kim, take it away.
Thank you, Charlie. I didn't pay Charlie for that blog plug. Thank you, Charlie. It truly is an honor to be with all of you tonight. And I just, I want to put my nervousness on the table here to stand between my dear friends, John Thorne and Bill Wiley Kellerman, is a little more than daunting. And then Gail Presby on top of it. So I'm very humbled to be with this group of presenters, and I'm also humbled to be with all of you. I know many of you who are in the room here right now, and I want to be very clear before we begin that I am not an expert and I'm not a professional. Frankly, I struggle every day of my life with the topic that we're going to be discussing today. As Charlie said, I've done a lot of peace team work domestically and internationally. And if I'm honest, I have to say that I often find it easier to do that de-escalation work on the streets with people who are very, very angry and sometimes very, very armed than I do with some of my fellow Catholics, with some of my coworkers, with the people with whom I'm close in my day-to-day life. It's a challenge. So I don't come tonight with any answers. I hope that we can leave tonight with questions as community, questions that we can continue to explore. I'm just a fellow traveler. So, I have no great knowledge to impart tonight. I want to say that up front. I also want to say, I'm very nervous right now. I'm an introvert and I'm much more comfortable expressing myself through writing than speaking. So I'm going to ask your generosity with my stumbling and bumbling. And if we have problems with technology, I would like to see this tonight, not as a performance, but as an act of love. Communally. So that said, things have changed since the time Marge asked me to give this talk. I mean, since that time, Joe Biden has been elected president. There's been a refusal on the part of many, many people to accept those results. And the numbers who have died because of COVID have only continued to escalate. Just to kind of set the stage here, within the past few weeks, to kind of give a picture of some of the divisiveness and division that I've witnessed personally on the day after the January 6th insurrection. That week, we were having school online. And when we started class that day, my first class of the day, one of the students immediately wanted to deflect discussing what happened on the 6th and try to equate it with Black Lives Matter and said, well, what about Black Lives Matter? Another student immediately said, what if those folks going into the Capitol had been Black or had been brown or had been Muslim or had been undocumented? So within my period 2 class, this division was apparent, I mean, right out of the gate. I'm active in a 12-step recovery group, and those meetings are happening in person because of the generosity of churches, and the churches have been insistent, of course, that people socially distant, that people wear their masks. And just a week ago, someone who has been in that program for a very long time came into a meeting and whipped his mask off and said, I have my rights, I want my freedom, I'm not wearing a mask in this building today, while other people were looking on aghast. And I have to say, with our work with Meta Peace Team, we are being inundated right now with calls to place peace teams, but especially to do trainings all over the country. People are hungry for community, and they're also hungry for some of the skills. And I hope tonight that we're going to get to practice some of those skills. I also want to say tonight that I'll reference MPT a lot because that's the primary work I do. And with MPT, we always talk about wearing 2 complementary hats. The one hat for sure is the hat of a peacemaker. There's no doubt about that, a hand out for peacemaking. But at the same time, we believe you cannot do that work unless you're also doing the prophetic work. And the prophetic work is to actively challenge and dismantle all systems and ideologies that are anti-Black, anti-brown, anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, anti-Semitic, anti-LGBTQ. Injustice is indivisible, justice is indivisible, and we believe that while we're doing the work of peace, we also have to be deeply committed to the work of justice in undoing those structures so that someday we're not going to need peace teams. I also tonight am going to reference, I think Marge Sears began last week, Marge and I were talking with the two hands of Barbara Deming. And I'm going to explore that a little bit tonight as well. So what we'll do tonight, I'm not a natural storyteller, but that's part of our peace team training, is to share stories, because stories are real. You know, stories are flesh and blood. So I will be sharing a lot of stories tonight. We'll be having some small group breakout rooms as the night goes on, and some nonviolent skills. And then also I'm going to share a little bit of research that I've done on this topic. So before we get into all of that, I've asked Charlie to open us with a meditation, because in the work of nonviolence, the primary thing always is to be calm and centered. And with Meta Peace Team, we don't do anything without first really taking the time to do the work of centering. So Charlie, could you please lead us in a meditation?
Sure. Kim is requesting that we allow silence itself, to disarm us by remaining silent for 5 minutes. The 13th century Dominican priest and mystic, Meister Eckhart, taught that when we are silent, we create a void that the spirit fills. Note also that the ancient word for spirit in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin is breath. So let's disarm ourselves for 5 minutes, quieting our monkey minds by simply following our breaths in and out, beginning with the sound of the bell.
Thank you, Charlie. Um, that's the most important part of the evening tonight. Um, I think it's really cool how the word, to conspire together means to breathe together. And so tonight we are all co-conspirators in this work of, as John Lewis said, making good trouble nonviolently. So I'd like to kind of just bring us back to this idea of the division that we're witnessing right now. Clearly, we're living in a divided country. We're also living in a divided church. And just a few statistics. I don't usually like to quote statistics, but I will read some tonight. So, Pew Research did a study last year, and they found out that about half of everyone in the United States, adults, acknowledge that they have completely stopped talking about political news with someone as a result of something that someone either said or wrote online. The Associated Press, I mean, we know this now. The vote came out, 49% Catholic vote. This is the Roman Catholic vote. 49% Catholics voted for Biden, 50% voted for Trump. Just split right down the middle. Last year, the American Psychological Association found that 40% of respondents said that the current political climate has caused strain within their families. And I'd like us just to reflect on this for a minute. Each of our families is so very, very different. Are you one of those families that has experienced or is experiencing some sort of a division over ideology, whether it's religious or political? A Pew poll in June found that 1 in 4 people, 25% of people in the United States, believe that powerful people intentionally caused COVID. And we know that 1 in 3 people believe that the election was stolen. So that just kind of gives us some context in terms of, the different views right now that are dominant in our country. I'd like to make a recommendation. I'll be mentioning several books and so on as we go through, but a film that I'd really recommend is the film Social Dilemma. You can see it on Netflix, and I'll type all these resources up and give them to Marge and Charlie to share. But Social Dilemma is a really important film. My students have seen it, and it's really allowed us to have richer conversations in class once they've seen this film and they understand the thesis of the film. The film features powerful people from Silicon Valley. I mean, people who have been part of Silicon Valley forever, doing the technology work. And they have come to see that social media, which initially was seen as something that could bring the globe together, could make the world smaller. And it has, and it does. But they've also found that due to algorithms, we're living on 2 totally different planets. Algorithms are driving the divide in this country. And I don't want to give the film away, but at the end, someone with many years in Silicon Valley makes a statement when he is asked, what is the worst case scenario in terms of what could come out of what's happening on social media? I'm not going to give it away. You can watch the film yourself, but it's a very jarring answer. And when you put it in the context of what we witnessed a few weeks ago in DC, I dare say the film is slightly prophetic. It's right on the money. I'd also say that, yes, we talk about politics, but I'd say we're also in a profound spiritual crisis right now. We are at a moment of reckoning over this nation's history of white supremacy, the violence of white supremacy. And I really do think that we are seeing kind of the chickens coming home to roost in terms of those 3 giant triplets that Dr. King spoke of, the giant triplets of racism and poverty and militarism, in the intersectionality of the 3 of them. I would actually say this is an apocalyptic moment that we're in. There is this kind of revelation, this great revealing of who we really are that's happening right now. And I think that the demand of this moment is for both peacemakers and prophets. Both. And I really feel strongly right now, this is a moment that is calling for the fire of the prophets. I've been leaning into the Psalms a lot. I don't think there's literature anywhere that encompasses the totality of human emotion the way that the unadulterated Psalms do. You know, Psalms of lamentation, Psalms of rage, Psalms of a desire for healing, for joy. And this is a moment that's calling us to go really deep. You know, when Dr. King was killed, right, on April 4th, 1968, he was in Memphis, as we all know, working with the sanitation workers. And he was working on his homily for that Sunday, for his sermon for that Sunday. And the title of that sermon is Why America May Go to Hell. And I want to lift that up right now in this moment, because we're talking tonight about nonviolent, you know, how do we talk to one another and so on. But to remove, you know, to remove the context, I think is not going to do us any good. And I think Dr. King's question is a question that we should sit with and that we should ponder. Tonight, we do want to talk about, you know, reaching across the divide, if you will. But I'm going to beg us to take a really nuanced approach to this. There is not a one-size-fits-all prescription. Context is everything, you know, and I'll say that like 3 times: context, context, context. You know, the tools that we might use on the street to de-escalate someone who is, you know, maybe mentally ill and armed are different skills than we would use when we're talking to a colleague with whom we both, you know, vociferously disagree. And the skill set that you would use with your uncle over for Christmas is another skill set. And there are gradations here that I think need to be acknowledged. So yes, we do reach across the divide. And I would say, I would lean into the prophet Isaiah and also the Poor People's Campaign, which I'll mention a little bit. We're called to be repairers of the breach. That might be better than reaching across the divide, to say, how do we repair the breach that we find ourselves in? But I want to be clear that this is not a call to like dive into the abyss. This is not the moment like to just hold hands and sing Kumbaya with white supremacist and nativist groups that are attacking our friends, our colleagues, our neighbors, or recruiting them. I'll talk about that in just a minute or two. I am, you know, this talk kind of changed as you know, after January. I said I can't give the same talk exactly that I did a couple months ago. I was pondering, you know, one of my great mentors, Mama Lila Cabell, always taught us that, you know, silence is violence in the face of injustice. We cannot be silent. But yet that great paradox, which is central to our faith, the good work begins in silence. You know, we have the silence that Charlie just let us in that gives us that deep heart so that we can find our voice when we see the injustice that's going on. This is going to sound hard, but I try to come from the heart and be vulnerable, and not politic, but the scripture that's been on my heart for the last few years, and it's been deep in my heart, is the scripture that says, do not think that I've come to bring peace on earth. I've not come to bring peace, but a sword. And, you know, I've heard people take that scripture as a call to violence. Jesus supports violence. No, I actually have a visualization of that scripture. And for me, it's allowing the sword of truth to cut through untruth, the sword of truth to cut through oppression and injustice. And when that sword cuts through, things fall to either side, right? Mother will be against daughter, father against son. I mean, I'm misquoting that scripture. I apologize. But, you know, ultimately, of course, God wills healing and unity, redemption, reconciliation. But even Jesus said there are times when we need to shake the dust from our feet and move on. And I want to be clear on this point, though. See, this is kind of a both and. It's not an either or at all here. I mean, of course, human dignity is always upheld. That's Catholic social teaching 101. That's the primary principle of Catholic social teaching, is the inherent dignity of all human beings, no matter who they are, no matter what they've done. You know, I tell my students, people may forget who they are and whose they are, but that does not take away their innate dignity, no matter how bad the behavior. So we have to recognize that, but we also need to be discerning and humble and clear in naming things for what they really are. As we try to be people of nonviolence and people of peace, we have to see what we're really dealing with here. You know, if people had any delusions that we're not in profound political and spiritual crisis, January 6th should have convinced people that maybe we need to take a deeper look. So, you know, I want to at the same time tonight lift up, right, you know, Martin Buber's idea of I, thou. You know, we're not in relationships that are I, it. We don't objectify anyone. Everyone is a thou, because we are all created in the image and likeness of God. And so, you know, my prayer is that we can call things truthfully for what they are, but we can also ask for the grace to see people and situations with God's eyes. And for me, sometimes as far as I can get with it, like I say, I'm a fellow traveler, I have no advice, but as far as I can get with this sometimes is Jesus is weeping. Jesus wept, Jesus weeps. And sometimes it's to sit with Jesus and weep and honor people's freedom to make decisions that they choose to make. The other scripture that comes to me as I was preparing this talk was, we must be wise as serpents and harmless as doves as we go about this work. Before we look at some practical skills, and we will have a little fun later in practice and look at some of these practical skills, I do think it's important. I want to continue a little bit, kind of this whole idea of signs of the times. You know, what time is it right now? And let me pull up, let me see if I can get this slide to work. Okay. These are not pleasant pictures to look at, but I think it's important we do take a few minutes and look at January 6th. I can't help but think that often our liturgical calendar in the church really gives us something to ponder. When we consider, for example, you know, the bombs that were dropped, the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima was dropped on the Feast of the Transfiguration. I mean, if there's not a religious truth or message in that terrible juxtaposition of an atomic bomb and transfiguration, I don't know what is. And I think it's not lost on me that January 6th was also Epiphany, the Feast of the Epiphany, a time of revelation. And I think the revelation in this country is, this was not the action of a few bad apples. This was not an aberration in our nation's history. This is who we are. So I do want to take a few minutes and say a few things about some of the hate groups and QAnon, because there's a reason I want to do this and why it matters. So first, I want to just contextualize this. We know that, you know, when Barack Obama was elected president, we saw a real rise in hate crimes. But the last few years of President Obama's presidency, there actually was a decrease. If you look at Southern Poverty Law Center, there was a decrease. Well, since 2017, there's been a 55% increase in white nationalism in this country. Trump's own FBI director said that the greatest domestic terrorism threat comes from white supremacists. So you know, at first I was like, well, that doesn't fit with this talk. That's not what this talk is about. But I think it is, because as I started researching a little more, and I follow this stuff closely anyway, with Meta Peace Team, we do. All this summer, we were having weekly meetings. We called them the What Time Is It meeting, to borrow Grace Lee Boggs' phrase, what time is it on the clock of the world? We were meeting every week trying to discern, we got the sense that this was, we were going to see something similar to what we saw in January. And frankly, I was surprised it didn't happen sooner, and that it wasn't even more severe than it was. But I started researching this deeply, and I was been listening and following a group called Life After Hate. I don't know if anyone's familiar with this group, but Life After Hate consists of people who were involved in hate groups and have gotten out. Now, as a Christian, I believe in redemption. I believe that people can turn their lives around and come to some other understandings. But one of the founders of Life After Hate, Sammy Rango is his name. What he said is that these hate groups, and we're talking the serious hate groups, are recruiting and indoctrinating kind of everyday people who are really unaware of the rabbit hole that they're being pulled into. They're really unaware of it. Now, does that absolve them of responsibility for their actions? No, but I think that it's really important to understand this. You know, last week, the New York Times said that there literally are hundreds of thousands of people who are following QAnon. And we all know, you know, I think we have a sense of what QAnon is. And people adhere to those conspiracy theories in different degrees. I mean, some people are full in, right? Believing that, you know, the world is controlled by this cabal of Satan worshiping pedophiles who are running a global child sex trafficking ring. But then there are others who are kind of on the rim of that. They're kind of on the periphery of that. But what Life After Hate is saying is that well-established hate groups are recruiting from among people who are kind of following these conspiracy theories in ways that are pretty well organized. And they're saying that we need to inoculate people who are being pushed into these extremist views before they get radicalized. And this really kind of took me by surprise. Some of the places where the recruiting is going on. One place is kind of the anti-science corner. This would be some of the folks who are real anti-vaccination and you know, doubting science. So that's one group. But the other group, and there have been a lot of articles on this actually in the last few weeks, are kind of the health and wellness movement groups. And these guys are kind of making inroads into this. And we're being warned that we should take, oh, I'm looking at this message here. Tom, a second police officer. Oh, I missed it, Tom. I'll catch that a little later. But that there are on-ramps. There are on-ramps to these conspiracy groups that lead people down this rabbit hole. And some of the on-ramps are health and wellness movement. And also, they've done the research that shows, you know, and this shouldn't surprise anyone, you know, people, not the poor. Poor people are not being pulled into extremist groups, but people who fear losing their social or economic status. I mean, that shouldn't really scare, you know, surprise anyone. Now, where I want to go with this is how do we respond? Because these are people we know. That's why I'm including this. These are not people who are, you know, donning, you know, Nazi garb. I mean, these are people that we live near. These are people maybe sitting in our places of employment. These are people sitting next to us in our pews in church, and they're not aware fully of what they're being pulled into. So here's what Life After Hate's recommending. Number one, that you do not fight over facts and ideology. Do not mock or demonize. I mean, this was a big mistake when Hillary Clinton called people a basket of deplorables that drove people in the opposite direction. And that we shouldn't be belittling or demeaning people. They recommend being positive and proactive and keep people linked to the real world. Do not cancel the relationship. Don't say, oh, you're this conspiracy theorist, I want nothing to do with you anymore. They're saying, no, actually you should engage the person more and do not reduce them to their political ideology. There's someone in my life now, and I want to be respectful of boundaries, but someone that I see every day who is highly educated, has several degrees, has life experience of doing a lot of compassionate and good work in the world. And this person is convinced that these ballots showed up in the middle of the night at TCF and that this election is, and the story keeps getting a little more into this conspiracy hole. And this is someone who is in a position that really should be aware of this, but obviously isn't. We're recommended get the person away as much as possible from social media, because that's where a lot of this is taking place, and engage in what's called deep canvassing. Deep canvassing is when you talk through about highly controversial subjects, but you do it through your personal narrative rather than appealing to facts. And I'll say a little more about that later. And this does work. I mean, this is a practical tip for all of us, no matter what work we do. I can tell you that, last year I was at the US-Mexico border 4 times. And when I talked to my students about asylum seekers and what's going on at the border, personally, they can hear much better than if I give them facts and statistics. They close up, they're defensive. But when they hear people's real stories, it has a softening effect on the heart. I want to read a quote to you from the communications director of Life After Hate. He says this, he says, talking about the content of the hateful ideology does not really help at all, even if you'd rather be refuting anti-Semitic, misogynist, or racist rhetoric. What does work is exploring what the ideology offers the person. Former extremists have shared that belonging to an extremist group made them feel like they mattered. Reinforcing that someone belongs, whether it's in a family or other group, can help diffuse some of the appeal of extremist ideology. So, this is that invitation to look deeply, to look much more deeply, what's underneath all of this. Now, that said, the recommendation is to let go of the hardcore believers, of those who are involved in like serious hate groups, because there's no headway you're going to make. I mean, this is the shaking the dust off your feet. Let me pull up a slide here to demonstrate firsthand what I mean by this. And I know these are hard slides to look at, but I think it's important. This is last year at Hart Plaza. Our Meta Peace team was asked to place a team during Pride because there were supposed to be preachers who showed up who, we deal with those guys all the time. They come and, they have signs telling people that because they're gay, they're going to hell. And I mean, it's pretty offensive, but we were not expecting down Jefferson to see a group of Nazis. And if you look closely at the picture, they were armed to the teeth with AR-15s walking down Jefferson. These are not the guys that that you're going to sit down and have a heart-to-heart discussion with until they're ready to come back to the other side. There's another book that I would mention that's very good. It's called Culture Warlords: My Journey into the Dark Web of White Supremacy. And it's written by a Jewish woman by the name of Talia Lavin. And she has actually infiltrated into like the deep web. She's infiltrated these groups. And it's a fairly terrifying book, because this is not just a small movement. There are more people, there are more people involved in these hate groups than we want to guess. So that's a couple that I would recommend. Now, given the fact that the recommendation here is not to engage and to shake the dust off your feet, I do want to say that I think as nonviolent practitioners, we can be creative at times in challenging a narrative of hatred. And I want to share a quick story. This is in MPT, what we would call a story of empowerment. The picture you're looking at is on Warren Avenue, Warren and Miller Road in East Dearborn. This was the Arab American Festival. And we were asked to place a peace team because this group of pastors were showing up, and you can see the sign on the right. They were sprouting a lot of hatred, and it was all weekend long. They were not from Michigan. They came in from out of state. They're very similar to Reverend Phelps and the Westboro Baptist Church, to that whole thing. And these guys were just awful. And they were focusing their hatred, the young man on the right, on this young woman wearing the blue hijab. She was maybe 14 years old. And I think because she stayed and tried to engage them, they called her every name in the book. They, you know, for men of God, waving a Bible, their language was very offensive. They called her mother names. They said things like Muhammad is a pig and, you know, you belong to a pig religion. It was very, very offensive. But I want to share this story because this is the power of nonviolence in the face of hatred. She ultimately gave up the idea of trying to engage them theologically. That was not going to happen. But what she did was on her own, with no prompting, she crossed the street and she, I'm sorry, Mary Ellen, it was bottled water, but she bought some bottled water and she handed it to this preacher and she said, "Sir, your mouth must be so dry from all that preaching." She said, "In my religion, it says to honor people when they honor the visitor and show hospitality when they come to your home." And she said, "Welcome to Dearborn." And she handed him this bottle of water. And as you can see from the photo, he smiles. He accepted it. He smiled. And there was a moment, maybe a minute of real human interaction that happened here. He went back to his preaching. He went back to his vile language, but I have to be hopeful enough to believe that her action changed his heart in some way that has caused him to reflect. So I want to get to these two hands of Barbara Deming that I mentioned at the beginning. So what do we do when we're faced with someone who is engaged in behavior? This isn't just someone with whom we have a political disagreement. This is someone who is sprouting language that is really hurting people. And this church window is really a beautiful depiction. This is Jesus having the two hands of nonviolence demonstrated. So, on the one hand, you know, you've got the hand that's just like a stop sign hand saying, "Stop. You can't do this on my watch. No way." And I'm going to quote here or cite the work of Rebecca Solnit. Rebecca Solnit is a journalist and a social critic, and she wrote a pretty provocative essay called "Not Meeting Nazis Halfway." And what Rebecca Solnit says is similar to what the guys from Life After Hate says, which is you cannot placate or appease people when they're practicing hatred at the expense of people who are being oppressed. That when we show deference to intolerance, it really only emboldens and feeds intolerance. You know, Solnit goes on to say that, you know, there's a danger to taking the naive stance that everyone's feelings are equally valid. And I want to read a quote from her because I think this should resonate. She said this. She said, "The truth is not some compromise halfway between the truth and the lie, the fact and the delusion, the scientist and the propagandist. If half of us believe that the earth is flat, we do not make peace by settling on it being halfway between round and flat. Those of us who know it's round will not recruit them." So the one hand says stop, but the other hand is extended. And this motion is just so powerful. If you'll, you know, I hate to be reading other people's words, but they're so important. Let me read what Solnit says. The hand that says stop, you can't do this. The other hand says, "I will never cast you out. I will be here when you are ready." So Solnit says this: we do better when we bring people out of delusion by being kind and inviting rather than by mocking them. But that's inviting them to come over, which is not the same thing as heading in their direction. In other words, we don't meet hatred somewhere in the middle of the street. We stand on the side of love and on the side of justice with our hand open and say, "I'm waiting for you here." But there's not a compromise where one, tries to find a half measure to hatred. let me read Barbara Deming, who is the person who kind of made popular this idea of the two hands of nonviolence. This is from her book, Revolution and Equilibrium. And she said this: with one hand, we say to the one who is angry, or to an oppressor, or to an unjust system, stop what you're doing. I refuse to honor the role you're choosing to play. I refuse to obey you. I refuse to cooperate with your demands. I refuse to build the walls and the bombs. I refuse to pay for the guns. With this hand, I will even interfere with the wrong that you are doing. I want to disrupt the easy pattern of your life. But then, the advocate of nonviolence raises the other hand. It is raised outstretched, maybe with love and sympathy, maybe not, but always outstretched. With this hand, we say, I won't let go of you or cast you out of the human race. I have faith that you can make a better choice than you're making now, and I'll be here when you're ready. Like it or not, we are part of one another. St. Francis, in his recent encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, said the same thing. He said this: this does not mean calling for forgiveness when it involves renouncing our own rights, confronting corrupt officials, criminals, or those who would debase our dignity. We are called to love everyone without exception. At the same time, loving an oppressor does not mean allowing him to keep oppressing us or letting him think that what he does is acceptable. On the contrary, true love for an oppressor means seeking ways to make him cease his oppression. It means stripping him of a power that he does not know how to use and that diminishes his own humanity and the humanity of others. Powerful, powerful stuff. So one thing that I think is important as we do this work, as we outstretch one hand and we use the other hand to say stop, is try to maybe identify some of the rhetorical practices that you are sure to encounter when you're working with people who are entrenched in some of these ideologies, and also people who are just coming from places sometimes of unexamined privilege. And the first is, this quote is, I think, a really powerful quote. So Desmond Tutu said this: sometimes people will insist that there are two equal sides to an argument, and they don't consider the power differential. This can play out in a lot of different ways. This is similar to what President Trump said after Charlottesville. These are two good groups of people. Or this is what happens when someone says, well, the day after the insurrection, when a student tries to equate that with Black Lives Matter. So the quote from Tutu, which goes along with that, is: if you are neutral in situations of injustice, you've chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse, and you say that you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. So this demand that things always be, there are two equal sides. I think a response that works well, and not sarcastically, not at all sarcastically, but I've asked people, well, so what is the other side of Jim Crow? What is the other side of apartheid? Or tell me, what is the other side of the Holocaust? I think those are fair questions to ask when people say, oh, there are always these two equal sides. There's no recognition of injustice or power differential in there. The second thing that often happens, and boy, I see this happen all the time, is that people will dismiss someone's emotion or their impassioned pleas for justice. They'll dismiss it as just sheer emotionalism, and they'll insist on this kind of Western mind detached objectivity. And I will never forget a situation. It was after Tamir Rice was killed. and someone wrote an editorial that was just lamentation, grief, and rage. And someone said, well, I wouldn't really take that seriously because it's not very factual. It's not very, it's overly emotional. And I think a nonviolent response to that, but a clear response, is to say, perhaps you have not been close enough to the flames of injustice to feel the burn. And may life open up for you in a way that you get to taste or stand next to someone else who's tasting injustice, and you'll understand the screams of a mother. You'll understand the rage of a parent. You'll get it. That one comes, I think, maybe sometimes with just lived experience and maturity. Another rhetorical thing that happens that I think we need to be aware of is when I call it the exceptionalism to separate you from the group that you're a part of. It goes kind of like this. Well, you're one of the good ones. You're one of the good ones. You're different from the rest of that group. And that needs to really be addressed because that has the effect of really, number one, it's totally disrespecting groups that people belong to. And number two, it's really disempowering, and it really takes away people's agency. And these are all things that nonviolently, I think, need to be addressed. The other is, and I just learned the term for this, it's generally called whataboutism, and the Latin is tu quoque, which means you also. And I had this happen a month ago. And I mean, that's what got me searching on where the origins of this tactic is, because I've seen this. And again, I have wonderful students. I don't want to single out students, but I had a student raise his hand in my class, and we were talking about last summer. There was a Black family in one of the ring suburbs, and someone had spray painted racial epithets over their house and their garage. And we were talking about kind of the levels of violence. And I was telling that story. And this young man raised his hand and he said, well, Miss Redigan, I don't hear you decrying the fact that somebody spray painted a police station in Portland. It completely derailed what we were talking about. And the purpose of tu quoque is to try to make the person who is initiating the conversation look like a hypocrite. In other words, I was a hypocrite because I didn't say anything about somebody who'd spray painted on a police station. This is a technique that we've seen increasingly. The last one that I would mention, and I think this is one that we really need to be ready to address, again, because I think if we don't anticipate this happening, it's easy to come from the gut and just go off on someone, as opposed to kind of thinking through, like, what would a clear, bold, nonviolent response sound like? There seems to be a lot of oppressors claiming the victim role. So for example, when you would challenge someone perhaps for espousing a racist view that really, makes someone else a target, the person whom you are challenging for making that view suddenly becomes the victim, and the target of the racism is completely out of the picture. And I think we've seen this a whole lot, and I think we need to come up with some, and I think collectively we can come up with some ways that we respond to this kind of thing. So I didn't mean to talk so long. I get going with this stuff, and I apologize. We are going to be interactive, I promise you that. But I do want to just kind of move out of this section by asking the big question, why? I think at the heart of nonviolence is always asking why. Why? I've been in situations, many of you who are in this room right now have been in, even, I'm looking at Mary Ellen Gondek, who spent a lot of time in the Gaza Strip, right? And we encounter violence of all different kinds. And the question always is, why is this happening? And in our own country, you know, we need to do some analysis. I mean, certainly we need to look at white supremacy. We need to look at an economy that is leaving so many people behind. We need to look at the lack of a social safety net that goes along with that. People have a need to scapegoat others when their own situation is not going well. Shift in demographics. A lot of people are so fear-based, they can't tolerate the thought that this country is not going to be a majority white country. And that probably has a lot to do with the immigration policy in this country that we witnessed as well, just like a demographic fear that people have. And very much, and I really want to hear what people here have to say, because this is a profound group of spiritual folks, is like loneliness and atomization and the lack of community, people feeling isolated. You know, I think of Mother Teresa, who said that, you know, she never saw loneliness like she saw here. Last week, another piece of reading I'd really recommend, Thomas Edsel, who's an editorial writer for the New York Times, wrote a really good piece, A Sister of Mercy. Yes, A Sister of Mercy sent this out. And it was a piece that really, I thought was well done. The title of it, it's too long to put in the chat box, but How Racism, Grievance, Resentment, and the Fear of Diminished Status came together to fuel violence and mayhem on January 6th. And it asks several people, like, what's your take? What was driving that? And again, to ask why does not mean to condone, you know? I mean, you know, where I grew up with people who are, some of them are in this movement that we saw on January 6th. You know, I grew up downriver in Taylor, and when we got out of high school, anyone could go out and get a job in the factory, a middle-class job. Those jobs went away. And in 1980, we saw the moral majority bring in very fundamentalist religion. It was already there, but it kind of married with politics, with the moral majority. And I saw a movement toward this decades ago happening in my own hometown. And I have to ask, what's going on here? What's below the surface? There's so many theories that are out here. I don't want to go into a lot of detail on this, but you know, one theory is called the terror management theory. And that's interesting. This is a neuroscientist. I kind of got into reading some of his stuff, Bobby Azarian, and he says that people driven by the fear of death, they create this kind of cultural worldview to help them deal with that existential fear of death. And in a way that would give their life meaning. This would be some of like these conspiracy theories we're looking at and so on right now. And that, you know, these folks tend to end up in very like fundamentalist religion and far right nationalist groups and a war mentality. And, you know, I'm not being political when I say this, but the researcher himself said this, that, you know, President Trump did create an atmosphere of kind of existential fear that resulted in a lot of fear-based violence. This researcher says what we need to do, this is what Meta Peace Team says too, we need to move away from nationalism, from tribalism, and we need to move into a more cosmic world view where people do not fight one another, but we come together to fight things like climate change. We come together to fight things like poverty. That would be a huge shift. Meta Peace Team talks about the interconnectedness of everything. And it's a paradigm, it's a shift. My own observations, I mean, just a few things that I would say here is, I wonder how much of the hate we're seeing is unresolved grief. I have often wondered, and again, there are people in this room far wiser than I've often wondered why in this country, we seem to bypass grief and go to violence immediately. I mean, it's our history for one thing, but I'm thinking after 9/11, there was this kind of pregnant pause where we could have taken another route. We could have been mature and looked in the mirror and asked about our own foreign policy, ask what would make people so angry. That doesn't mean you condone something, but we didn't. I believe it was the Feast of St. Francis, actually, when we first started bombing Afghanistan. I mean, we have an uncanny way of unleashing violence on these feast days. I also wonder sometimes, you know, how we help heal, you know, hurt people. And healing people heal people. We know that a lot of these guys in hate groups, a lot of bullies and so on have been bullied themselves. And so the work of nonviolence is really healing. And, you know, I think more and more the importance of social workers and psychologists and pastoral ministers and just people who have a listening heart to help pull people out of hatred. I'm going to end this section with this, if you'll give me just a second here. Let's see here, get rid of these guys here. I do think that one thing that's really missing right now is a good social analysis. I wonder if the men and women who are at the Capitol on January 6th, if they had a social analysis of what's really going on, where violence really comes from, if maybe they wouldn't take a different tact. This is the work of Dom Helder Camara, who was the Archbishop of Recife, Brazil, and he talked about what he called the spiral of violence. And, you know, I and my friend Elliot have put this together as a visual with using an iceberg. You know, we see violent level 2, we see street level violence all the time. And we also see state violence. And, you know, sadly on January 6th, we actually saw an intersection of the two of those to some degree, but we don't ever look below the water at the primary violences in our world. Poverty, racism, inequality, lack of voice, lack of education, militarism. And, you know, so many people who are aggrieved and who are raging and who are angry would be so much better off if they realized and we were to offer some social analysis. So I kind of want to end this section before we move into you know, our sharing. I want to end on a positive note. I think someone who really gets this, or a movement that really gets this, is the Poor People's Campaign. The Poor People's Campaign gives us a way out of this moment in which we find ourselves, because it is a moral fusion movement. You know, Reverend Barber and Reverend Liz Theo-Harris, who you know, are the front of the Poor People's Campaign, if you will, or the inspiration for the Poor People's Campaign, they talk about moral fusion. They're picking up the Poor People's Campaign that, you know, of course, King was working on when he was killed. And, you know, they say there are 5 major violences here. They've added 2 more to Dr. King's. There's militarism, there's poverty, there's racism, and now we have to talk about environmental destruction. And we also need to talk about religious nationalism, which many of us in this room need to take on that. We need to take on that struggle and address that religious nationalism, because that's what's fueling a lot of what we're looking at now. But, you know, this movement is calling for a moral revival. And it says it's not about left or right. It's about right and wrong. It's not about conservative and liberal. It's how can we analyze things and come to an understanding that all of us are in this together. You know, I think of this as kind of like a Pentecostal movement, and not in the sense of, you know, Pentecostal religion, but in terms of a moment of spirit, of Pentecost, of calling us to something different. You know, it's not lost on me that overtaking of the Capitol on January 6th, when you juxtapose that with Resurrection City, the Poor People's Campaign in 1968, where people camped out in front, you know, lived, not camped out, but lived in front of, you know, in front of the Capitol, lifting up economic injustice and racial injustice. This to me seems, I think the Poor People's Campaign is the Holy Spirit giving us another road to pursue. A lot of these disenfranchised, like white folks that I went to high school with, whose jobs are gone and so on, rather than, you know, blame people of color, which they've been conditioned to do. We all have been in this country. That's our country's history, divide and conquer. How much better if we could get them on board with the Poor People's Campaign and say, look, we're not enemies here. The real enemy is, you know, it's structural. So I would leave that on a positive note. And I think Reverend Barber uses language that resonates with people. I think people on the far right, actually, if they really knew what he's talking about and really accepted that analysis, would move away and would come over onto the right side and work for their own economic self-interest if they were given that analysis. So, I'm gonna go real quick through this next portion here. It's clear, I want to move into the personal. That's, I think, why some people came tonight. And I truly want to apologize if I kind of got caught in the morass of, this moment we find ourselves in. But, let's move it to the personal. Let's talk about people whom we love, people we care about, people we worship with, people we go to school with. And we just seem not able to have those conversations like we'd like to have, or it's kind of like the elephant in the room, the political divide, the ideological divide. And, it's very interesting. I didn't know this, but I found out that there actually been studies that show that people in this country, they live and they work with people that willfully who think the same way they do. It's like a filter, a geographical filter. And that if people move into a community where people are not like them ideologically, they're very inclined to actually leave that community and go back into the bubble where they feel they belong. I'm in the 13th district, Rashida Tlaib's district. We love Rashida over here. And it's just kind of like everybody in my neighborhood, it seems to be true, kind of thinks alike. And Barack Obama, though, in 2010, he gave the commencement address at University of Michigan. And Obama said this, he said, if we choose only to expose ourselves to opinions and viewpoints that are in line with our own, studies suggest that we become more polarized, more set in our ways, that will only reinforce and even deepen the political divides in our country. And President Obama's words are a challenge to me, because I know myself, I like to be in a bubble where I feel I can understand and be understood. But both President Obama and St. Francis might challenge us to step out of that bubble a little bit. So I very quickly, I want to just, raise the question, like, so why do people think like they do? And I'm just going to throw out a few books here. I am not going to go into any explanation here at all, but some theories. A name that you may want to check out his work. Can you guys hear me? I got checked. Okay, it's George Lakoff. George Lakoff is a linguist and a cognitive scientist. And what Lakoff says is that, conservatives and progressives tend to kind of have a different, he takes the myth of the nation as a family. And what he says is that those who are conservative, they tend to see the strict father model. Now, this would make sense when you think of conservative values, and there's not a judgment in this. There's just to try to understand. They come from the mindset of, the strict father, and that would mean the focus is on security. It's on traditional roles, obedience, punishment, tradition, competitive, meritocracy. And then the progressives, they kind of have the parent model, he calls it the nurturant parent model. And this is the model that would emphasize empathy, not strict gender roles at all, community rather than punishment, restitution. And, and George Lakoff, and disclaimer, he's trying to counsel progressives on what they're doing wrong. And he says what they're doing wrong is they're stuck in the 18th century with an Enlightenment mindset, which is rational, logical, facts and figures. And Lakoff's like, look, most of our politics is shaped unconsciously, subconsciously. And he said the conservatives do a much better job because they use frames, they use metaphor, they use story. And this is where I think Reverend Barber is doing so very, very well. Reverend Barber says, we need to have, a moral revolution in our country. Or Dr. King, when he said we need a revolution of values, that resonates. When you use the language of values, the language of morality, it resonates in a way that cold-hearted facts and figures don't. Another name to know is Jonathan Haidt, H-A-I-D-T. He's a social psychologist, and he wrote a really intriguing book, and he's got some TED Talks too. His book is called The Righteous Mind: Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. And he says that, we basically have different moral palettes. Conservatives and liberals have different moral palettes, kind of similar to what Lakoff was saying. You know, liberals focus on equality, fairness, and care, and they have a more global outlook. Conservatives more on loyalty, moral purity, and parochial. And he says it's yin and yang. We need them both. You know, instead of fighting with one another, there are good things that could be harvested really from both of those moral palettes. And then the last thing, I am not of the science, my background's in the humanities, but I actually started doing some research in science, some brain research and I don't know, I mean, I would trust better minds than mine to tell me if this is, and these studies are good studies and they corroborate one another, but it's showing that conservatives have larger amygdala, the part of the brain center that deals with security and fear, sometimes trauma, that they have more gray matter in the amygdala, not larger, but more gray matter in the amygdala. And liberals have more gray matter in the anterior cingulate cortex, which is the part of the brain that can tolerate things being more open-ended, not having to have security quite as much. And some brain scientists are actually saying that there may be physiological, we're wired different physiologically. Now, where I'm going to end this with all of us right now, to get you into breakout rooms, is the idea of our worldviews. You know, how do we, the question for us is, why do we see things the way we see them? Why do other people understand the world they understand the way they do? You know, I mean, it's where we come from. It's our, you know, our socioeconomic status, our gender, our race, our religion, you know, the time in which we were born. And so often we just go through life with these unexamined worldviews, and along with worldviews will always come blind spots. I mean, I confess openly, I grew up lower working class, and I had a blind spot toward rich. I thought the kids in Dearborn were super rich and snobby, and I had them judged and sealed. And I had to realize that was a blind spot that I had because of my worldview. And so what I'd like us to do is, Susan's we're going to go into breakout rooms I'm going to check the time here, for a full at least 15 minutes. And the question I have for all of you is this: we're going to be in rooms of 4 or 5. What's kind of like most shaped your worldview? What's helped you see things the way you see? And do you have any blind spots? And then the second question would be kind of like, what discussions do you find most difficult right now? Who are the people in your life that you're struggling with because of ideology? Okay, so kind of have an open-ended discussion. I'll type reminders of the questions in the chat box for you to see, and then we'll come back and we'll kind of harvest some of that together. Okay?
I don't know how many people were together in breakout rooms. There were only 2 of us.
Yeah, a couple of the rooms were really small. Many had 4 or 5 people. There we go. Good. Okay, so we want to harvest and kind of hear a little of your conversations. But before we do that, I really want to apologize. It's kind of the teacher's curse. We are not going to get to do practice nonviolent skills training like I planned. I think I have 4 hours worth of material here, and I so apologize to all of you for over talking earlier. I'll have a few things I want to say, but I'd like to hear what you all had to say in terms of some of the difficult conversations you're having, or your worldview, or exploring the worldviews of others. And I think you can just unmute yourself and jump in. No need to raise hands, not in school.
I was just...
Go ahead, Beth.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. I was just going into this with my group. I'm not a big social media person, but I'm exposing myself more and more to it because I am seeing the tenor of the conversation, and I'm thinking, God, and these, I was just saying, I'm a choir director at Christ the King, so, and I see a lot of choir people online, or at least a few of them, and the one thing that I noticed in a conversation that I had yesterday, and with the conflicts between families, things that are happening within families where these divisions, incredible divisions are happening. And one person was commenting about how he's been ostracized by his family because they are completely QAnon centered, and they are delusional, and they are saying that he's delusional. There's nothing going on here. And as I was reading this, I was thinking, I felt really sad as he was saying that they're ostracized. They're ostracizing each other, basically. And I said, I'm so sorry about that. But I was trying to figure out how to respond to it because I didn't want to fan flames. And I don't understand QAnon. But what he ended up saying is, I said, yeah, it seems like we have two completely different realities in our society. And he responded saying, it's one society, one reality, they are delusional. And I said, but that bothered me because I feel like we've got to understand that's not going to help. I don't think it's going to help. So I said, yeah, but they think you're delusional too. So what do we, it makes me sad and it scares me because they crossed a major line a few weeks ago. So how do we, and I didn't, and he never responded. So there you have it.
Yeah, thank you, Beth. Like I say, the people I've been trying to study seem to suggest that we need to ask people, well, how did you come to believe that? And try to get underneath, what are they really hungry for? What are they really, yes, calling someone delusional is only going to close the door of the heart. And it's going to steal the heart from real communication. And, I think that advice to see the person beyond their ideology is really important. And, I'm not a psychologist, but I would imagine that for a lot of people, they're feeling powerless. They're feeling scared because of COVID. And a conspiracy theory does give you some sense of mastery or control, maybe. Possibly. I don't know. I'm curious to hear what others think.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
How about some other sharing from your groups?
This is Kathleen Walker. Hi, Mrs.
Hi.
Redigan.
Hi, Kathleen.
I'm Mayende Anderson's aunt and Molly's mentor person from UOD Mercy.
Of
remember?
Course. Good to see you.
Good to have you here. Yeah, well, I'm on telephone, so I couldn't really see everything tonight, but I've been listening, and I purposefully, besides last week's and the ones coming up, I do want to be part of the series, but I was particularly interested in being here tonight because I asked a question last week that we said, let's ask Kim Redigan next week. And that is, I am struggling with having a conversation with a person, a white woman, who I've been very, very close with in my life. She signs my cards, your mother from another color. And we do a lot of things together, and mother-daughter things all the time with her and her husband not having any children. And just really she was a nun in our lives when we were growing up, and then when she came out of nunnery and got married, we just been together for forever. So, but I'm struggling with having an honest conversation with her right now. And yes, brought on by George Floyd, and then again, the things at the Capitol, and just all that's been going on with Black Lives Matter. Because if I was to tell my truth, I have let her behavior and some of the things she says go too long. So I've been in prayer for myself as well as her, but for myself on how to forgive myself from that and how do I apologize to her for that because I've let it go too long. And now we're stuck. We literally, it's been almost a month and we haven't talked. When we did talk this summer, it was hard. I kind of went off on her. So I let all my anger come out at one time. And we've talked since then and tried to make it, a real conversation, a courageous conversation, face to face and everything, even in the midst of COVID. But that didn't do it. I know it didn't do it for me, and it's obvious with her silence that it didn't do it for her. And so I struggle and wonder if you could help me on how to first settle myself to be ready for the conversation, and then how do I approach her with the conversation?
You asked the $1 million question. I think all of us in this room are probably struggling with. I really do. I mean, that's first of all, it's good to see you. And I wish there were easy answers. I mean, a few things that I might share is that I see Dorothy Ritter typed in the box earlier, the importance of meditation in terms of kind of disarming the heart and calming and centering us. I know that when these kind of things happen, I don't know about other people here, I have to check my body because I can feel my stomach tighten up. I can literally feel my heart seize up. And it's like, okay, you're not ready then yet, go to meditation, go to prayer.
Okay.
And also I have found it helpful, kind of focus on the person's interest and ask, I'm legitimately ask, how did you come to understand things this way? Tell me your story, like why, why, but with true curiosity. And, but you need to be able to do the same with sharing your perspective and your story. And I think with these conversations, there isn't, I try to let go of the outcome. Like one conversation is not going to be the end all and be all. This may be a series of conversations that may go on for a long time, but I really honor, your honesty because I too I listened today to a TED talk by a guy who's a spoken word artist and, about the silence of violence and the times he held his tongue as a teacher in the classroom by not speaking his truth and what that does to our spirit and our soul. But I think that we do have to come into it with the right disposition, right? A receptive heart, checking our motivations, calming, centering ourselves, and presuming goodwill. And, it's so hard when it's like, how can you think that way? But that's kind of some of my Ignatian training is to presume the goodwill on the part of the other person.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know if that helps. I'm sure others in the room have more wisdom on that. Would anyone like to respond to that? That's a great question. Something that's worked for you?
Well, affirming the meditation in whatever form you find that, but I'm not sure if this was mentioned because I was writing something too. It just went out of my head. Breathing.
Yeah.
What you did, you talked about breath and the translation into Holy Spirit. And seriously, what we do in Meta Peace Team is so powerful. And what we do in Beloved Community, 5 minutes of silence, regardless of the work we have to do. We always begin every meeting with 5 minutes of silence. We end every meeting with 5 minutes of silence. So again, silence, as well as the forgiving of yourself and being gentle with yourself. I have a friend from whom I've been estranged for about 3 years now. And I just put it out there in the atmosphere. I send cards. I ask for forgiveness. But I have forgiven myself now, which makes it a lot better for me to continue to speak about it and heal.
Yeah.
It's tough.
It's
Really
very,
tough.
Mhm.
yeah. Thank you, Linda. It's good to see you.
You too.
Linda's one of my mentors in the realm of meditation and so on. Truly,
Mm.
I've learned from Linda the importance that everything does begin with meditation. Yeah, I do think that, I don't know, I found myself crying a lot lately, and it may come out of powerlessness in terms of having to just sit and weep
Mhm.
at my
Mhm.
own powerlessness, which is what makes this talk tonight so difficult, because there are not easy answers at all. I do think vulnerability and sharing, to the question, I think to share why it matters to us so much. Like I'd like to share with you why Black Lives Matter for me is so important, and share my own story with vulnerability and without having to try to convince the other, but just simply to give that as an offering of self.
Mhm.
That's something for us to do.
Kathy, I'd like
Yes.
to, it took some training with the Dialogue Company led by David Camp, and he has a method for talking to people who disagree with you, called the race method. So I recommend you look that up. I've used it on a Trump supporter, longtime friend of mine, and it was effective.
Mhm.
Can
And
you
are you
repeat
saying
that,
race?
Charlie?
It's called, the method is called the RACE method, RACE, and each word stands for a part of the method, but it's the Dialogue Company, and David Camp, CAMPT, is the director.
Can you put that on chat, please?
Sure.
Well, and I think it's worth mentioning, I'm looking at beautiful Dorothy Ritter there, and I'm getting an image of Dorothy when we were on a peace team together in Egypt. We were in Cairo, and we were surrounded by soldiers and police. And keeping in mind that about 90% of our communication is nonviolent. It's body language,
Mhm.
it's eye contact. And I'll never forget Dorothy went from soldier to soldier to soldier and just looked at each of them in the eye. She didn't speak. She didn't move quickly. She very slowly. And it was so powerful. And so I think that the way we show up too in our body language can say a lot in terms of whether we're open to someone or closed. And again, it's much easier to do that out on the streets when you kind of go into that mode. But to practice that in our day in and day out life, that's really a discipline.
Mhm.
Do I have my fist clenched? I'm capable of that very easily. That's why I say it's, this is so much growth in this area.
Mhm.
Kim, there was a question on chat about the entertainment industry making fun and using humor to criticize the right. And again, it goes to your recommendation of the social dilemma. I think we really need to look at what we're putting in our hearts and minds and ears and eyes, and be a little bit more conscious and critical of what we're taking in and seeing.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I'm kind of tearing up. I'm so sorry. I tell you, I've just been crying a lot lately. I mean, this is a real personal story, but growing up, we were often called trailer trash or white trash, and you internalize that. I've sat with that all my life. I could have 10 PhDs and I still hear a voice in my ear sometimes saying, you're just trailer trash, And so when entertainment industry puts things out that gives people a message that their lives are not worthy, that they're, it's going to drive people into a corner to seek meaning, and they'll seek meaning with whomever will receive them. And unfortunately, those who are waiting to receive people who've been given the message that they're not anything are groups often that are dangerous. And so I think that was a good question, whoever asked that. Mockery is so anti-Christian, anti-human. I'm sorry, I'll go anti-human, to mock people, you know? But I've done it the other way too. I mean, I'm not claiming to be innocent here. I mean, we really collectively, I think, need to look in the mirror.
Yes, I think, I don't know, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Think you're touching upon something that's really important, is that self-care, especially during these times when there's so much coming at us from our, families, the TV. Self-care is really important part to continue that work. And just to give some science behind the meditation part is the science behind it is the brain that fires together, wires together. And when you meditate, you're getting your frontal lobe, or the white matter, gray matter, I forget which one, of love, compassion. You're activating that part of your brain. When you activate that part of your brain, the amygdala, which is where our fear, fight or flight is, that decreases. The response to that decreases. So as you meditate, you're actually helping your brain, you're wiring your brain that is your go-to spot. It's not going to be your fear, your fight or flight. It's going to be your love and your compassion. So like Roar says, if it's true in one place, it's true in another. It's true in science. And now we have the MRIs and the brain technology to look at that. And there really is something behind it, not only spiritually, but physically as well.
Yeah. Oh, Dorothy, thank you so much. And if I could add on to that, with the meditation and with the violence is, I don't think we've even scratched the surface of the trauma work that needs to be done. I think a lot of what we're looking at right now is trauma that's not been tended to. When we talk about those levels of violence, if we don't take care of that level 1 violence, level 2 violence can either blow up in the streets or it can become self-destructive. I can't take the poverty, the racism, the lack of a voice. So I will in some way hurt myself or hurt those closest to me. And so that helps me when I'm in hard conversation, is to ask myself, is there trauma going? Is this person coming out of fear and trauma? And what would it look like just to sit with someone you can't connect with? Just ask them, could we sit together and meditate? You'd then be co-conspirators.
Can I say something?
Marjorie, any other questions?
I wonder if I can just add to something. When we first started this night, Kim, you mentioned that you lean a lot toward the Psalms. And I noticed throughout this whole COVID year, in my isolation, I have done that as well. But as I was listening to people when they're talking about their conflicts with each other, just something that the conflicts that they're struggling with, one of the things that I use is the Psalm 139, which is kind of my springboard to begin my meditation, because it seems to me when I do that, it causes that surrender into that place of being with Jesus, where you are not judging yourself and you are not being judged. You are just allowing the love to take over. And then see what happens with that.
Mm. Thank you, Beth. Thank you.
Could I just throw in a couple of things that have occurred to me as we talk?
Sure.
I have in my family a nephew who was born with learning disabilities. And when a kid like that starts to go to school, they feel failure right away. So my sister moved him into a classroom that was more Montessori style, and his education all the way up helped him to be tactile. Right now, he is a spectacular carpenter. So he has a life that gives him a real good living, but he has always been angry. And he hangs around with some motorcycle guys and has friends that are in this spectrum that are sort of Trumpish. I love him to death, but I haven't had a conversation about that with him. And I think because I love him and he knows it, I could get away with it. That's one thing. The second thing is that last summer when on television we were watching all these people from all across the country marching and marching for different things. A lot of them were people, white people and brown people and every other colored people who were marching about racism. That has never happened before to that extent. So, and then the third thing, which I felt tonight, the IHMs are currently involved in a conversation like this. We have an assignment to go talk to somebody who is other before our next group meeting. So it feels like the earth has shifted in some way and we're part of it. It's just so beautiful. So I wanted to say that.
Thank you, Angela. Yeah, I mean, apocalypse is a good thing. I mean, the things are being revealed and opened up for us here now. And that is something, and we believe in resurrection. Thank you so much for those comments. Thank you.
Well, Kim, we're going to have to close in a couple minutes. And before we do, on behalf of the entire group gathered, I want to thank you so very much for sharing such personal stories that drive your points home, and how important it is to recognize the other as not other, as one of us and part of us. And so thank you so much for that and for all the resources you gave. And you continue. I think all of us should know that you continue to be a resource to us. And let's sign on to writetimeforpeace.com to hear more of Kim's brilliance in this regard. Before closing, however, I do want to tell everybody that to come back next Wednesday when Bill Wiley-Kellerman will join us to talk about gospel nonviolence in the life and legacy of Daniel Berrigan.
Yeah.
Bill, like Kim said at the very beginning, it was great that she positioned herself between John Thorne and Bill Wiley-Kellerman
A road between two thorns.
work of hers, for sure. And before leaving, I want to thank you, Susan, for all the technical help. Thank the members of the Peace Through Justice Committee of Jesu and the beloved community at Jesu. We say at Jesu because several of our members are not from Jesu, nor are they Catholic, and we have one Buddhist member. So we gather at Jesu, but we are open to all as a beloved community. And in closing, I would offer a prayer from Thomas Merton. It's a poem. The whole world is secretly on fire. The stones burn. Even the stones, they burn me. How can a man be still or listen to all things burning? How can he or she dare to sit with them when all their silence is on fire? Kim spoke of prophets being on fire, and also of our need to feel the burn. So here too, Merton evokes a sweat lodge, but he is also speaking to a profound truth revealed in postmodern science, which is that every atom in the universe contains photons or light waves. Thus, all atoms and all beings are on fire. All beings are a burning bush. One does not have to travel to Mount Sinai to encounter the divine in a burning bush. Every bush is a burning bush. Every leaf, every stone, every fish, every bird, and every person. We are all on fire, but we have to sit with them and be receptive to them. We have to dare to sit and to listen. We have to dare silence. That is the contemplative way. Merton says, contemplation is essentially a listening in silence, an expectancy. All beings are, in Eckhart's words, words of God and revelations of God. Merton knew this as well, but it takes silence to grasp it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you, Charlie.
everyone.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Good night.
you.
Yeah. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
See you
All right.
next week.
Good night.